Imagine this. You wake up on your 30th birthday in the year 2030. Nothing dramatic happens. No balloons. No life crisis montage. You just wake up and open your banking app. And for the first time, you realize something feels very wrong. Not because you're irresponsible. Not because you made terrible choices. Life still feels financially tight. You're not struggling in the way people imagine struggle. You're working. You're trying. You're paying your bills. But somehow, existing feels expensive in a way you never expected. Here's the uncomfortable thought most people don't want to say out loud. By 2030, being 30 years old won't feel like the start of adulthood, and most people won't be ready for it. We're taught to believe that if we just get through our 20s, get educated, get a job, be patient, things will eventually settle down. That life gets easier once you figure it out. But what if that belief is outdated? What if the problem isn't *U**? Most people think being broke looks like failure. You'll see people with degrees, careers, and decent incomes who still feel stuck, still anxious, still one surprise away from stress. And the scary part? It won't happen suddenly. It will happen slowly. So slowly that you won't even notice when the pressure starts. At first, it shows up as little things. You hesitate before ordering food. You delay plans because this month is tight. You tell yourself next year will be better. And you believe it, because that's what you're supposed to believe. We've been trained to think the future will sort itself out. That raises will come. That costs will stabilize. That adulthood eventually rewards effort. But what if the math no longer supports that story? What if the cost of simply being 30, housing, food, transport, health, rest, quietly becomes more than most people are prepared for? Not luxury, not indulgence, just normal life. Most conversations about money focus on extremes. Either you're told to hustle harder, or you're shown lifestyles that feel completely out of reach. But almost nobody talks about the middle, the regular person, the one doing their best, the one following the rules. What happens to them? What happens when the gap between effort and stability keeps widening? Because here's what makes this moment different from the past. Previous generations faced problems, yes, but they were often temporary. This one is structural. Costs don't reset, they compound. And psychology plays a bigger role than most people realize. You normalize stress. You normalize delay. You normalize survival mode. And by the time you realize something is wrong, you're already deep inside it. That's why this isn't a video about numbers. It's a video about pressure. The mental load of planning, adjusting, sacrificing endlessly. The emotional weight of realizing that adulthood isn't what you were promised. And if you're in your 20s right now, or close to 30, this isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to wake you up gently. Because the people who struggle the most in the future won't be the reckless ones. They'll be the ones who assume stability would arrive on its own. Before your lifestyle silently locks you into stress. Before your choices narrow without you noticing. By 2030, most people won't feel broke because they failed. They'll feel broke because they never saw the rules change. And once you see that clearly, something powerful happens. You stop blaming yourself. You stop waiting. You start thinking differently. So in this video, we're going to talk about what the future cost of being 30 actually looks like. Not on paper, but in real life. How it shows up emotionally. Why it feels confusing. And what separates the people who cope from the people who feel trapped. Not with hype, not with fear, just clarity. Because clarity is the first form of control. Let's talk about what this actually feels like in real life. Not headlines, not charts, just normal days. You wake up on a weekday morning. You check your phone before getting out of bed. A message from your bank, a bill reminder, a balance that's slightly lower than you expected. Nothing dramatic, but enough to tighten your chest for a second. You tell yourself it's fine. You'll adjust. On the way to work, you do quiet math in your head. If I spend less this week, if I push that expense to next month, if nothing unexpected happens, this kind of thinking becomes automatic. You don't even realize how often you're doing it. At the grocery store, you pause before putting something in your cart. Not because it's unnecessary, but because you're tired of guessing how much room you actually have. You still buy it, but the joy is gone. Eating out feels like a decision instead of a pleasure. Travel feels like a luxury. Rest feels earned only after guilt. And the strange part is this. From the outside, your life looks fine. You're not failing. You're not reckless. You're not lazy. You're just constantly managing managing money, managing expectations, managing the gap between what things cost and what you earn. And that gap creates a specific kind of stress that's hard to explain. It's not panic. It's not crisis. It's low-level tension that never fully turns off. You start delaying things that used to feel normal. Doctor visits, replacing worn-out items, moving to a better place. You tell yourself you'll handle it later. Later becomes a pattern. Relationships start to feel the pressure too. You hesitate before making plans. You feel awkward when money comes up. You downplay your stress because you don't want to seem dramatic. And that assumption is dangerous because it teaches you to accept strain as normal. You start measuring life in months instead of years. Just get through this month. Just wait for the next paycheck. Just hold on. There's no space to think long-term. No mental energy left to plan. Even when you do try to think about the future, it feels abstract. Retirement feels too far away to matter. Buying a home feels unrealistic. Stability feels like something other people somehow unlocked. You're told to be patient, to trust the process, to keep working. So you do. But deep down, something doesn't sit right. You're doing more than people before you did, yet feeling less secure. You work harder, but progress feels slower. That creates quiet resentment, not toward anyone specific, just toward the system, the timing, the pressure. You wonder if you missed something, if there was a class you didn't take, a decision you messed up. And because no one around you talks honestly about it, you assume the problem is personal. That's the most isolating part. Everyone is struggling silently. People don't post about financial anxiety. They post highlights. So you compare your behind-the-scenes stress to someone else's edited life, and you fall behind in your own mind. The truth is, this experience is becoming common, not because people are irresponsible, but because the baseline cost of life is rising quietly. You feel it when rent goes up again, when insurance changes, when subscriptions renew, when basic services cost just enough more to matter. None of these things alone break you, but together they shape your behavior. You become more cautious, more reactive, less optimistic. You stop dreaming big because dreaming feels risky. And this is how most people enter their 30s now. Not excited, not confident, just hoping things don't get worse. But here's what's important to understand. This stress isn't random. It isn't bad luck. It isn't a temporary phase. It's the result of how modern life interacts with human psychology. Our brains assume stability. They assume effort leads to relief. When that doesn't happen, something breaks internally. You start questioning yourself. You stop trusting your instincts. You make short-term choices because long-term thinking feels unsafe. And this is where people get stuck. They adapt just enough to survive, but not enough to change direction. So the question isn't, why am I stressed? The real question is, why does doing everything right still feel like it's not enough? To answer that, not financially, psychologically, because the biggest cost of being 30 in 2030 won't be money. It will be the mental patterns people build without realizing it. And once those patterns lock in, they shape everything that comes after. To understand why being 30 in 2030 feels so heavy, we need to talk about how the human brain actually works. Not numbers, not policies, just how people think. Your brain is designed to look for patterns and safety. When effort leads to improvement, your brain relaxes. When effort leads to uncertainty, your brain stays alert. For most of human history, progress felt visible. You worked, you saved, life slowly got easier. But modern life breaks that pattern. Costs rise quietly. Changes happen slowly, and your brain doesn't register slow danger very well. This creates a psychological trap. At first, nothing feels urgent. You adapt. You cut back a little. You delay a little. You adjust expectations. Your brain says, this is fine. We're handling it. But here's the problem. Adaptation feels like control, even when it's actually erosion. Imagine standing on a beach while the tide comes in. The water touches your feet. You step back. It touches again. You step back again. Each step feels small, but eventually, there's nowhere left to go. That's what rising costs do to your life. And because it happens gradually, your brain never triggers a "this is serious" response. Instead, it normalizes discomfort. This is why so many people say, I don't know how I got here. The second psychological factor is something called mental accounting. You don't see money as one thing. You see it as categories. Rent money, food money, emergency money. Your brain can't rebalance properly, so you start borrowing from the future. You use next month's money to survive this month. You don't think of it as debt. You think of it as flexibility. But flexibility has a limit, and once you cross it, stress becomes permanent. The third factor is delayed feedback. When you overspend slightly this month, nothing terrible happens. No alarm goes off. No one calls you irresponsible. So your brain learns that the behavior is safe, but the consequences show up much later, when options are fewer and pressure is higher. This is why people don't feel broke suddenly. They feel trapped gradually. Another powerful force is comparison. You're surrounded by people who look like they're doing okay. Same age, same income, same lifestyle. So your brain assumes you should be fine too. You don't see their anxiety, their debt, their late-night calculations. You only see the surface. And when you feel stressed while everyone else looks calm, you turn inward. You assume something is wrong with you. That belief quietly lowers your standards. You stop asking for more. You stop negotiating. You stop imagining alternatives. Because psychologically, hope feels risky. The next factor is future discounting. Your brain values immediate relief more than long-term benefit. When money is tight, this instinct gets stronger. You prioritize comfort today because tomorrow feels uncertain. This isn't weakness. It's survival wiring. But in a world where costs compound, this wiring works against you. You trade future stability for present calm, again and again, until the future arrives, and the bill is due. There's also identity pressure. By 30, you're expected to be settled, stable job, clear direction, some sense of security. When reality doesn't match that image, shame creeps in, and shame changes behavior. People avoid looking at their finances, avoid conversations, avoid decisions. Avoidance feels like relief, but it quietly hands control away. The final psychological piece is something rarely discussed: uncertainty fatigue. When your brain is constantly evaluating risk. Can I afford this? What if something goes wrong? Will next year be harder? It gets tired. Decision-making quality drops. You choose familiarity over strategy. You stick with what you know, even if it's expensive, because learning something new feels exhausting. This is how people get locked into patterns they never chose consciously, not because they're careless, but because their nervous system is overwhelmed. So when people ask, why does it feel harder than it should? The answer isn't just money. It's that modern life applies constant, low-grade pressure, and our brains weren't built for that environment. Understanding this matters, because once you see that your stress is asterisk response asterisk, not a failure, something changes. You stop blaming yourself, and when blame fades, clarity appears. That clarity is the doorway to better decisions. But before we talk about solutions, we need to look at the cost people don't see coming. Not the monthly cost, the invisible one, the one that shows up years later. When people think about the future cost of being 30, they usually think in monthly terms: rent, food, bills. But the most expensive cost doesn't show up on a statement. It shows up in time. And once time is gone, you can't renegotiate it. Here's how the invisible cost actually works. When life is expensive, you delay decisions. You don't move when you should. You don't change direction when something feels wrong. You don't invest in yourself when it would matter most. You wait for clarity, but clarity rarely arrives on its own. So years pass in temporary mode. Temporary job, temporary living situation, temporary stress. Except it's not temporary anymore. It becomes your 30s. The invisible cost is momentum. When you're constantly reacting, you're not building. You're maintaining. And maintenance doesn't compound. Another hidden cost is optionality. In your 20s, you have options because time is flexible. You can take risks, make mistakes, recover. But when costs rise faster than income, options shrink. Every choice becomes heavier. Changing careers feels dangerous. Starting over feels impossible. Saying no feels irresponsible. You start choosing the least bad option instead of the best one. That's not strategy. That's survival. Then there's health. Not dramatic illness. Just slow wear. Stress affects sleep. Sleep affects focus. Focus affects performance. Performance affects income. And suddenly, the cost of stress becomes financial. People underestimate this feedback loop. They treat stress like a personality trait. I'm just anxious. I'm bad with money. But stress is often a signal that the system you're in is misaligned. Ignore it long enough and it charges interest. The next invisible cost is relationships. When money is tight, honesty feels risky. You avoid conversations. You avoid commitments. You avoid long-term planning with others. Not because you don't care, but because you don't want to promise what you're not sure you can deliver. Over time, this creates distance, not fights. Silence. And silence is expensive. Then there's the identity cost. When you spend years just trying to keep up, you start seeing yourself as someone who's always behind. That identity sticks. Even when circumstances improve, the mindset lingers. You still hesitate, still play small, still expect things to fall apart. That expectation shapes behavior, and behavior shapes outcomes. This is how financial pressure today limits future growth without you noticing. If costs rise a little every year, but income stays mostly flat, something predictable happens. You lose margin. Margin is the space between earning and spending. It's what allows mistakes, learning, and rest. Without margin, everything feels urgent, and urgency destroys long-term thinking. By the time many people reach 30 in the coming years, they won't feel broke in the dramatic sense. They'll feel boxed in. No room to breathe. No room to pivot. No room to slow down. That's the real cost. Not poverty, but narrowness. A life where every decision must justify itself financially. Where joy feels irresponsible. Where planning feels pointless. And here's the part most people miss. This doesn't happen because someone did one big thing wrong. It happens because small pressures stack quietly. One delayed choice. One postponed goal. 1 year spent waiting. That's why the future cost of being 30 isn't about one bill. It's about arriving at adulthood with less freedom than you expected. But this story doesn't end here. Because there is a moment, usually subtle, when people realize something important. A moment when the narrative shifts. Not from fear to fantasy, but from passive to intentional. That moment is the turning point, and it changes everything that follows. For most people, the turning point doesn't come from a crisis. It comes from a quiet realization, a moment where you stop asking, when will things finally get easier? And start asking, what if this asterisk is asterisk the environment I'm operating in? That question changes everything, because once you accept that the rules have changed, you stop waiting for relief. You stop assuming that stability will arrive automatically with age. You realize something important. The old path still works, but only for a shrinking number of people. And this isn't pessimism, it's realism. And start designing your life around what actually preserves freedom. Not luxury, not status. Freedom. The freedom to say no. The freedom to rest. The freedom to adjust when life shifts. Most people don't fail financially because they didn't earn enough. They fail because they built lives with no margin. The turning point is deciding that margin matters more than appearances. This isn't about doing more. It's about doing asterisk less asterisk intentionally. Here's a simple framework that works in high-cost environments. High fixed costs trap you. Once money is locked into obligations, flexibility disappears. The goal isn't deprivation, it's reversibility. Lower pressure first, then build upward. When everything comes from one mental bucket, anxiety takes over. Survival money keeps you stable. Growth money builds options. Even small separation restores clarity. You stop using future plans to justify present stress. Motivation fades. Systems stay. You don't need perfect discipline. You need decisions that repeat without effort. Simplicity beats intensity every time. Time creates leverage. A calmer schedule improves thinking. Better thinking improves decisions. Better decisions compound. Skills travel. Titles don't. In an unstable economy, flexibility is wealth. Take two people. Same age. Same income. Different design. One fills their life quickly. Higher rent. Higher pressure. No margin. The other keeps life slightly under capacity. Same income. Less stress. More room. 5 years later, the difference isn't money. It's choices. One feels trapped. The other feels adaptable. Neither is rich, but only one feels free. Mistake 1, waiting for income to solve structural problems. More money helps, but it doesn't fix fragile design. Mistake 2, thinking stress means you're behind. Stress often means the system around you is too tight. Mistake 3, believing adulthood means constant pressure. It doesn't. It means responsibility asterisk with margin asterisk. Mistake 4, comparing timelines. Everyone is adapting differently. Comparison distorts reality. When you design life with margin, something surprising happens. You make fewer emotional decisions. You recover faster from setbacks. You think longer term. This is how stability compounds. Not through speed, through resilience. You don't need everything. You need enough, with room to breathe. That's what most people are really chasing. Not wealth, peace. Being 30 in 2030 won't be cheap, but it doesn't have to be suffocating. The people who struggle most won't be the ones who lacked intelligence or effort. They'll be the ones who assumed the old rules still applied. Once you see the environment clearly, you stop fighting yourself. You stop waiting for permission to design differently. And that's where real stability begins. Not in income alone, but in awareness, in margin, in intention. And the earlier you understand that, the lighter the future becomes.